The governor meets with a rapper, but there's still no harmony at the State House. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. With us today, Matt Dietrich is back. He is editor of the website Reboot Illinois, which is trying to reboot Illinois, apparently, or at least report on what's going on.
Yes.
Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you.
Andy Maloney is here, State House Bureau Chief for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, the legal eagle in the crowd.
Good to be here.
Welcome back. Okay. In the introduction to the show, Chance the Rapper. It's actually been a little more than a week since the governor, it was on a Friday, met in Chicago with Chance the Rapper. Not everybody has heard of Chance the Rapper, but his dad worked for, I guess, was it Barack Obama, Harold Washington? Harold Washington, or Mayor Emanuel in Chicago, maybe not Obama, sorry. And socially conscious, very popular, won some Grammys. The governor had tweeted out saying, "Congratulations on your Grammy Awards." Chance said, "Can we meet?" They met, so we're talking about a guy who I believe is 23 meeting with the governor to try to figure out how to fix the Chicago school system's funding and perhaps the entire state of Illinois. And then the Chance the Rapper came out of the meeting in Chicago and said, "I thought things were vague," and the governor said, "Looks like we'll have a good plan by Monday." And then Chance had a press conference on a Monday and said, "I'm giving $1 million to the Chicago public schools. And $10,000 each for arts education to 10 schools within the city." And the governor, I'm still not really happy with that meeting. He should do his job. So how did we come out of this?
Well, if you have dealt with Governor Rauner, if you've been at his press conferences, and even if you've seen interviews with him that he does periodically, he'll do these kind of assembly line media interviews, you know that Governor Rauner is on message all the time. And what it sounds like happened in his meeting with Chance the Rapper is he stayed on message. And he gave him his standard spiel.
Probably we need reforms in order to give money, and we really want to help everybody, but...
And the economy, and if Speaker Madigan would just get out of my way.
Yeah, and we don't know for sure that he said that. Yeah.
But that's part of his whole talking point spiel. And, you know, a bit of backstory that I'm sure Chance the Rapper had this in the back of his mind when he went into this meeting is that back in November, Governor Rauner vetoed a bill that had been passed with bipartisan support that was going to give $215 million to Chicago public schools to fund their teacher pensions for this year. He vetoed that in retaliation for the General Assembly, which of course is led by Democrats, not having passed pension reform. Well, that threw Chicago public schools' budget into some chaos, and so all of that came before this meeting with Chance the Rapper. Thus, you have Chance the Rapper then saying, well, if you're not going to fund Chicago public schools in your capacity as governor, here, I'll write $1 million check. Really showed him up. And the governor, I don't think, came off looking too good from that whole meeting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the lesson is never tweet, but that's another.
Many politicians may be getting that lesson, I'm not sure.
Right, but yeah, this is, I mean, it kind of adds to the litany of things that have been unprecedented around here in this government during this budget impasse. The governor meeting with Chance, who is a Chicago public schools product. In fact, I think kicked off his rap career basically during a period when he was suspended from CPS. And so the whole thing kind of
I'm not sure the whole history, isn't it? Is it Chancellor Bennett?
Chancellor Bennett, right. And I believe his father did work for then Senator Obama, and then also does now work for Mayor Emanuel. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think he comes out and sort of comes out with the donation and sort of says, I can kind of put my money where my mouth is, whereas, you know, the governor is just sort of giving vague answers. And like you said, that is something that, you know, he's known for, but you're kind of not surprised that he's not going to divulge specifics about his political or policy plans to a hip-hop star.
Yeah,
it's sort of a public relations thing.
Well, and what's interesting about the public relations of that, Rich Miller, our colleague with Capital Facts, was pointing out the governor will have a Facebook Live and you'll see there's 250 people, 300, maybe 1,000 end up seeing it. And Chance the Rapper has like 3.5 million followers. So when he tweeted out how embarrassing it was that the governor and Democrats were fighting, and he used kind of a bad word in describing that later, and after his press conference, I think it was the next day, a lot of people are maybe, different kinds of publications. Billboard wrote a story about this and what's going on in Illinois, getting a little bit of attention, because mostly the Illinois fiscal problems, which are kind of historic proportions here, we're in the 21st month without a budget, have not been a national story. So maybe this did a little thing to make it, although as we now go a week later, it seems like we're kind of back just to the squabbling at the State House and see what happens.
It's interesting too, Bernie, with that tweet and with Chance's huge Twitter following. One of the struggles that I know that our website has had, one of the reasons we started was we wanted to get people who normally don't think too much about state politics thinking about state politics. What's interesting about the response on social media with Chance the Rapper and the governor is it got a whole lot of people talking and thinking about state politics who I bet hadn't crossed. I bet a lot of the younger Illinoisans who picked up on this may not have even known who their governor was. They do now. Didn't really work out as well, I think, as the Rauner administration would have liked it to work out.
Well, we'll see where it goes. Speaking, back to the normal kind of conversation we would have on this program about Governor Rauner and a prominent Democrat fighting about something. We did hear some pretty harsh words, and there was some court action involving the Governor Rauner and Susana Mendoza, the newly elected Democratic comptroller, whose job it is to pay the bills for the state, and she started paying something close to 600 employees in the Department of Central Management Services out of a dedicated fund, which is for certain things like garage and maintenance fund. The Rauner administration says you should continue, or you should pay that out of general funds. Susana Mendoza said, no, general funds are depleted. That means we're competing with people in nursing homes who need payment and daycare centers, whatever is able to get state funds now. So Governor Rauner actually went to court, and a judge said, no, Susana, I'm not going to get involved in this, and this was a court down in St. Clair County. The judge said, the comptroller's right, you can pay it out of whichever fund you want, and it's not up to the court to get in a fight with the governor and the comptroller. The comptroller, or the governor, then said, she's being controlled by Mike Madigan and trying to create chaos, and we need this money. And the comptroller says, don't tell me what to do your own job, get a balanced budget proposed, etc. Where are we, Matt?
This was kind of chapter 2 in a not very good week for Governor Rauner. And what you have here is, again, long backstory to make it short. Susana Mendoza defeated Bruce Rauner's handpicked comptroller, right, Leslie Munger, back in November. And really, Susana Mendoza never got out of the campaign rhetoric that she's been in. She ran both against Leslie Munger and also against Bruce Rauner, and has been a very vocal and unique among the constitutional officers in really sharply criticizing Governor Rauner for not having a budget in place. And this, I think, was the first major dust-up between that shows how it makes a difference with Governor Rauner not having his handpicked choice.
I think it makes a big difference, because she's been a very you can argue if it's positive or negative for the party, but she has been the point person among Democrats to really criticize him,
right,
over the budget stuff, and crystallize it in a way that some people haven't.
Sure.
Always pointing to the Constitution. It's up to the governor to propose a balanced budget.
Mm-hmm. And if you look back when Leslie Munger was comptroller, and we haven't had a budget for this whole time, so the comptroller's office is constantly doing triage. They're trying to figure out how much money is coming in, how much can we pay, who's going to get paid first. So when the governor had a friendly comptroller and wanted things done his way, they could be done his way. This is an example of how no, you're not going to be able to interfere in that office. And I think too that Governor Rauner wanted those payrolls, the paychecks paid out of the general fund, because he was building up the other fund in case there was a government shutdown.
Right, because he might be able to tap those funds because maybe they are already appropriated or don't need to be appropriated, right, or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andy, the governor also While in the morning one day after that court decision came out, he said, well, we will go along with that court decision. We don't like it. That afternoon there was a press release, we're appealing, and they have appealed. And then Mendoza's people put out their own press release, good day for Governor Rauner because, he lost the court case. The good thing that Mendoza said is they were able during the day to pay those 600 employees, but then the court case, being appealed would have put it on hold again. So it's just kind of interesting. We're stuck in court.
We're stuck in court. Like you mentioned, Rauner has said that they don't like the decision. They're going to appeal it, even though the payment, at least for now, should be on time. But there's also sort of this broader court challenge in terms of state worker pay that I'm sure we'll get into in a moment. But it strikes me that there's always been sort of squabbling between constitutional officers, sometimes when they're not in the same party or whatever, but you outline the history there, and it's kind of just fascinating how that comptroller position, which is sort of maybe to a lot of people an obscure position, is now sort of
it's more ministerial.
Right.
You write the checks,
and now it's sort of on the front lines in this kind of political battle that's been going on. You can even go back before Leslie Munger was out of office, was defeated by Susana Mendoza, and the Democrats in the legislature had to pass a law to get a special election, which also, I'm sure, aggravated Republicans and Governor Rauner.
And that happened, of course, that was one of Pat Quinn's last week actions, I believe, because a Democratic legislature passed that, so that, just to clarify, that when Judy Bart Topinka passed away and Leslie Munger was named, it wasn't going to be for the full 4-year term.
Right.
It was going to be just for 2. And Pat Quinn got that signed after the Democratic legislature passed it, before Bruce Rauner got there.
Right.
So interesting. You alluded to, Andy, the broader picture, and Lisa Madigan, who is the Attorney General of Illinois for many years now, and the daughter of Mike Madigan, the Speaker of the House, and the person Bruce Rauner likes to often point the finger at, has gone to court, in that same court in St. Clair County, and they're appealing, and she's asked the Supreme Court now to appeal quickly a ruling down there because she thinks that state employees shouldn't be paid without an appropriation. Right. State employees have been paid for this whole impasse without an appropriation under a court order, saying, well, you have so many contract employees, or employees have a contract, so the state should pay. Right. And yet this is kind of unique because usually government operates, and usually an impasse like this will end the next time a paycheck is due, and the legislature has to do something. And they haven't done anything, and people keep getting paid. Right. So Lisa Madigan asking the Supreme Court to decide this quickly yielded the governor saying to reporters, well, this is all coordinated. Right. Mike Madigan must be running it. Lisa Madigan is trying to create a crisis, and Susana Mendoza is adding her part to the crisis, and we just want these wonderful state employees to get paid, which is interesting because the Democrats all say Governor Rauner is the one, through his demands for his turnaround agenda items, because of which he will not agree to new revenue or a budget, is what has also created a crisis. Matt?
Well, and another interesting thing about that, Bernie, is that as Rauner was reacting and saying that it's Lisa Madigan and Susana Mendoza and Speaker Madigan, and they're all ganging up on me, he also made a remark about the judges in Illinois, that there's politics being played there too. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about that remark is that the same judge that ruled in Susana Mendoza's favor this week ruled against Lisa Madigan twice on the very and for Bruce Rauner
to keep state employees getting paid. Right.
That state employees.
And pronounce the name.
Robert Lesheen.
Right. In St. Clair County.
I've been saying it. Right.
So. And I've said before, and I've written this many times, that I don't think that this budget standoff would have been able to go beyond a couple of months long without that order back in July 2015 from Judge Lesheen. And that's because state employees have been paid. Most people think that state government is doing just fine. There's only that select small few who rely on human services providers whose money is not there, and they've been cutting services. Right. The few things in the state budget that aren't mandated spending by continuing appropriations or court orders, those are the people who are getting hurt. And I've always thought that's what has facilitated this budget standoff.
And in fact, Lisa Madigan also argues in her request to the Supreme Court to take up that issue that in other states and in the federal government, that is exactly the pressure that keeps budget making on the right path, that gets people to eventually force budgets. And without that pressure, without that real sort of shutdown looming, this has been allowed to continue. It's interesting to note as well that she asked the Supreme Court back then to sort of take up this dispute about who should be paid and how much, with no budget appropriations bills having been passed, and the Supreme Court declined the offer back then, so we'll see if they do it this time.
Yeah, she gave up in 2015 when the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear it quickly. She didn't pursue it, probably because at that time, who knew it was going to go for 21 months?
And she is clearly saying now that I'm doing this to
break the logjam.
To break the logjam, which is interesting, which you could argue that's creating a crisis. On the other hand, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, the real danger here, from my perspective, and I think from every taxpayer in Illinois' perspective, that the real danger here is what's developing is on two different fronts, with Governor Rauner and also with a lot of Democrats. Now they're talking about the Rauner side wants to make state payroll a continuing appropriation.
Right, so state employees get paid even without an appropriation.
So that it would never be subject to a budget. Well, what is the use of having a state budget if you don't have that pressure there? And I think in the House they were trying to push a bill that would keep them paid through the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah,
so they have to come back.
and wants it to be, I believe, a continuing appropriation. Then had a news conference late in the week saying, well, the Democrats were working with me and the governor, and now they're not. Maybe they're stalling. But it's interesting because the governor at that availability with reporters was saying, state employees are just as important as legislators who are only part-time. They get paid. Why shouldn't state employees? It is interesting, though, because legislators are in the Constitution, as is the governor. They're a co-equal branch of government. State employees, there's a lot of people there, so what limits would you have? And I know Avery Bourne, the state representative, who is carrying that for the Republicans, was saying, we would limit it to like the last time they had an appropriation, so you couldn't spend more. On the other hand, it is getting pretty loose when all of state government is operating without the legislature acting. And what about schools? And what about in addition to social service agencies, which are outside the realm of government, and the governor was asked, what about human service agencies? They're on contract too. Well, it's not the same as operating within the government. What about universities? Because ask the university presidents, they're all walking on very thin ice these days because the state budget impasse has affected universities almost as much as anybody, with going, they've got about less than half of the funding over the last 2 years than they had previously received.
And that's another argument that the Attorney General makes, is that this continuing order to keep paying state employees has actually inspired some other lawsuits from some of these people, some social service providers, et cetera. And if you keep paying people via judicial order instead of going through the budget process, that branch has effectively sort of taken over the budget making, and it's not supposed to be like that. It's not set up like that.
Yeah, which is actually very weird, because you have one circuit judge in Southern Illinois who's kind of, in a sense, allowed the impasse to go on for 21 months.
Right, and I believe, Andy, if there is a lawsuit now with like 37 social service agencies in Judge Lasheen's court. So
asking for them to get paid too, under the same theory. Well, we'll see where all of this goes. In addition to all this, and to put a closer focus on what Susana Mendoza talks about, the problem she has, there's about $12 billion in unpaid bills that are stacking up, during this impasse that the state owes. So if there ever is a grand bargain, which, by the way, has kind of fallen off the face of the earth for the moment, part of that will be several $billion in borrowing so that a lot of these back bills can be paid. Hundreds of millions owed to hospitals and providers. More and more of those providers are saying, pay us first because the state won't pay, just to get regular services. In addition to that, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability came out with another report for February, said that base revenues that month fell $423 million. So there's even less money coming into the state as we go on, and so that just creates a bigger problem as time goes on.
And COGFA is kind of like the state's version of the Congressional Budget Office. COGFA is always seen as sort of the neutral party, coming in, just kind of giving us, here's what it is in black and white. But anymore, when you have COGFA at a hearing, in the House or Senate hearing, it's like the Grim Reaper walking into the room because the news is so relentlessly bad. And I can remember, it doesn't seem like that long ago, when COGFA reports were somewhat routine,
Yeah, well, yeah. And
I was just going to say it's an excellent point, because you have people who are putting out press releases, basically like a partisan party, saying, see here, COGFA's estimate, this is why the governor or the Democratic legislators' plan is not working, when we get these sort of new revenue estimates that have been fairly routine, like you said, and all of a sudden they're another sort of bullet point on the
Well, it's interesting. The governor will continue to say, I think forever, but that we have to change the culture and the business practices of Illinois, in order to bring more business here, and that property tax freeze, and he talks about term limits and remap reform, and this will make the stack of companies that I've been in contact with, they'll come here if they just know our culture is changing. Whereas Democrats and some outside groups are saying, what businesses really need is knowledge of what's coming, something to plan with, which would be a state budget. And so you continue to have this divide, and I'm not exactly sure where it's going.
Well, it does seem like if you're talking about the business climate of Illinois, Governor Rauner is in his third year now, and he had a Facebook Live event this week in which he compared his administration to the 2013 Cubs, which finished last. And if he came in and he was the 2013 Cubs, then right now he's the 2015 Cubs who went to the NLCS. Governor Rauner's got to start realizing that
National League
Championship Series,
yes, for the uninitiated.
He's in his third year, and what's coming across now, I think, to the rest of the nation is that we're looking like an ungovernable state. And they're not looking at it as, the governor is trying to do one thing and he's got this unruly general. They're looking at, this is Illinois. And, he's halfway through his term now. Probably should be looking at, what happened last week with the grand bargain. It fell apart. That was the most progress we've seen in his administration toward a budget. He needs to, I think, probably be looking at, we need to get something accomplished here, because 2018's on the way. I'm going to have to run for re-election. I'm going to have to show people how this state is better now than when I was first elected.
Yeah. I should say, as part of what we discussed before, I asked Susana Mendoza, were you actually working with Mike Madigan? She said, absolutely not. I don't. And she said it a couple of times because it's a funny line, which is, I only take orders from my mother. So, that kind of thing. And Speaker Madigan's spokesman said the governor was hallucinating or something along that line. Steve Brown says things similar to that. Let's talk just a brief view into something else that takes in part of the viewing area. David Gill may be running for Congress, or says he's running for Congress as a Democrat against Rodney Davis. This is the 13th Congressional District, goes all the way from Champaign, Decatur, into Springfield. David Gill ran a very close race as a Democrat in 2012 against Rodney Davis, the current congressman from Taylorville. When they first ran against each other, in 2012, because it was an open seat because Tim Johnson had resigned or not run again, and he was from Urbana. Then David Gill sat out a year as Democrats put up candidates who proved to not be able to come close to Rodney Davis, who has continued to get tenure and experience, and he had worked in Congress before. Then David Gill tried to run in 2016 as an independent, but you have to collect so many signatures. He collected more than 8,000. You only need 700 as a Democrat or Republican. He went to court to try to say they're asking too much, but he didn't make it to the ballot anyway. And now he's running as a Democrat again, even though he's critical of the Democratic Party. Other people might run for that office, but we're in the middle of the new Trump era, Republicans trying to retool Obamacare. So I don't exactly know where this goes. And another name mentioned as a possible Democratic running is Carol Ammons, who's a state representative from Urbana, who says she's looking at the numbers and thinking about it. But if David Gill is in there as a Democrat this time, he can be rather tenacious, and I don't know if he would be viewed as old news to voters or if there would be renewed energy in this area because of Trump. I'm not sure.
Well, you do have this. Everyone is looking for 2018 to be, to the Democrats, kind of what 1994 was to the
Republicans
the
with the Gingrich revolution and the contract with America.
So you would think that the Democratic Party would really, really want to field the strongest candidate it possibly can in this race coming up. But you do have to wonder, how many times can a candidate run and run and run and run and run before it does start to. There is some value in running and losing for the name recognition.
Right. Well, Dick Durbin mentions that I think he lost his first 2 elections before he got onto the other things, the U.S. House. On the other hand, David Gill did run 3 times in an old district which was very Republican against Tim Johnson. So, he is getting up there in number of races. And he also is for some sort of universal health care, which he'll call like Medicare or Medicare for all. Will that sell now as it didn't in the past? Again, Central Illinois, you'd have to see. I'm not sure where it goes. Matt, you mentioned the Facebook Live. That was with, is it Tom Ricketts, who is the head of the Chicago Cubs? Let's talk about something fun. Springfield saw the World Series trophy, came to town. It was, there was a joint session of the House and Senate, the legislature, and everybody was a Cubs fan for a day, and then the trophy was taken over to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum, I think it was, and people lined up, and there were like 1,000 people that went, and many of them got to take a picture with Ryne Sandberg, the Cub great, retired. So what does this do to the atmosphere here, or is it just for fun?
Well, it is a brief, at least, distraction from the lack of progress and sort of the hostility going on for at least a day. Legislators all gathered in the House and sort of all paid homage to the Cubs and the great season that they had, and had their front office representatives come in and speak. I will say I think some people probably think that is a little bit of a distraction. Some people probably not terribly pleased that something like that goes on during a session where they have yet to approve a budget. But some of those things are sometimes routine. The Cubs winning the World Series, not routine, but distractions, very routine.
I think people might argue anything that gets Democrats and Republicans standing up together and clapping for the same thing in the same place may be progress.
Certainly some value.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. Matt Dietrich, Andy Maloney, thanks for joining me. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.